We come now to the Women's Rights in Africa Award, launched and sponsored by the African Development Bank. This award is for an outstanding piece of media looking at gender inequality and the rights of women and girls on the continent. And the nominees are...
Meet the two people risking everything to end this crime against women. Gina Moore for BuzzFeed News.
Often the men show up first because they're afraid they're bad at sex. They don't always have the vocabulary to explain the problem, but they know there is one, and they come looking for the doctor. He's a gynecologist, and he spent more than 20 years setting up and running a hospital in a rough city in central Somalia. Here, danger is white noise. There's clan feuds, there are pirates, there's the occasional explosion from Al-Shabaab. But the problem that brings the men who lack words, that's far more common. The problem for Galkayo's men is what is done in the name of their own masculinity to their women, when those women are little girls. Some people say they wouldn't even do it if they had a choice, but if you try to marry off a daughter who's not cut, you'll never get any camels for her.
My Nigeria, Sandra Agwebo, Lady Mechanic, Al Jazeera English.
I've been a mechanic for 30 years and my own garage called Sanders Car Care. With the force coming, like the oil is supposed to be splashing.
Okay. That's what I wanted to see. That.
When I opened up the garage, my name was all over town. If you go to the Lady Mechanic workshop, you will see that you will take care of your car like a baby. I started getting job. I could not cope anymore. I had to employ somebody. So I said, why not? Why not I start empowering women to be mechanics so that they can also open up their own workshop so that I don't just die with this idea. I started on my own to train about 7 girls and 1 boy. We work with the vulnerables, the ex-commercial sex workers, the school dropouts, the married women, especially Lady Mechanic focus on the poor.
On assignment, Vicky's story, ITV.
Vicky's murder left a void in so many lives, but beyond this, her neighbourhood, it was barely noticed at all. That's because a truly shocking part of this story is that in South Africa, the murder of a woman by her husband or partner isn't shocking at all. It's routine. 40% of South African men admit to hitting their partners, and a quarter of the country's women have been raped. So if you think the barbed wire and security gates resemble a camp for refugees from a war, then the women who find all too rare shelter at the Saki Bartman Centre would agree.
Please welcome Dr. Sipho Moyo, Chief of Staff and Director of Cabinet of the African Development Bank, to reveal the winner of the Women's Rights in Africa Award.
The Women's Rights in Africa Award is intended to recognize a media product that is either broadcast, digital, print, or film. The piece invariably shines a spotlight on an aspect of gender injustice on the African continent, advances the rights of Africa's women and girls, or highlights how the empowerment of women and girls can not only have a positive impact on development in Africa, but is the only thing that benefits the whole of society and transcends generations in its impact. Indeed, there is no development tool more effective than the empowerment of women and girls. This award is about so many inconvenient truths, truths that have become the unfinished business of the 21st century, and whose burden it is for the current generation to close the gender gap and advance human progress once and for all. In many developing countries, girls still do not have access to education for a number of social, cultural, political, and economic odds that are stacked up against them. In Africa, the women who make up 50% of the labor force in agriculture, and for the most part feed Africa, also only own less than 2% of the land titles. Statistically, in the course of today, as we saw in Vicky's story, 3 women will have died as a result of domestic violence in South Africa alone. Just because patriarchal norms and attitudes excuse or legitimize domestic violence as a private affair, And society has sleepwalked itself into normalizing the epidemic of domestic violence against women. Does anyone in this room get that? It's totally unacceptable. I could go on, and I'm sure many of you could as well. But we're here to say something has to be done to put an end to all forms of gender injustice for a number of reasons, including simply that it is the right thing to do. But beyond being the right thing to do for the more cerebral among us, it is also the smart thing to do. If we are to achieve our potential, it is indeed an economic imperative, and that's why we at the African Development Bank are involved and committed to defending women's rights, as well as to promoting gender equity on the African continent. That is also why we are proud to be sponsoring this prestigious Women's Rights in Africa Award for the second consecutive year in a row. Thank you, Joe Kibazo, for making that call. A little bit on how we advance the women's empowerment agenda Our agenda strategy at the African Development Bank, which cuts across our 10-year strategic objectives, which are popularly called the high fives, namely Light Up, Empower Africa, Feed Africa, Integrate Africa, Industrialize Africa, and Improve the Quality of Life of Africans. Across these high fives, the gender strategy seeks to strengthen women's legal status and property rights, seeks to promote the economic empowerment of women, and seeks to enhance knowledge management and capacity building in ways closely linked with the issues raised here today by the three nominees. And to the media, let me say this. Your role goes beyond entertainment and information sharing. You have the power and the means to educate, to empower, and to inspire young girls to dare to break the mold and become mechanics in a male-dominated field of endeavor, as shown in My Nigeria. You alone can show and tell the human story behind WHO's 130 million women and girls who have globally suffered from FGM. You can provide debate on why only 3% of perpetrators are convicted despite tough laws on domestic abuse, as shown in Vicky's story. Thank you for bringing us the stories of Oscar Pistorius and Riva Steenkamp, for bringing the story of Annie Diwani, Zanele Khumalo, Dolly Chabalala, and so on. But there are many more that don't get this degree of attention or make the news for more than a single broadcast. And today, we're reminded by these inspiring stories to believe in the future of possibility, even though we have our work cut out for us. Better public investment and technical assistance can support the development of lady mechanics across Africa. High rates of violence against women and girls can be addressed using stricter laws and adherence to law and awareness building. Today's nominees show the world that women's dreams don't have to die, that the obstacles that sometimes hold women back can become opportunities, and that something has to be done to ensure that young girls know that alongside their brothers, they hold up half the sky. And the winner is, on assignment, Vicky's story.
Well, thank you, One World. What an honour. John Ray and his cameraman Andy are working in Johannesburg currently, so they couldn't be here tonight. Presenter Reggie Omar is also overseas. But as executive producer, I can say on behalf of them and all of us that we will cherish this Women's Rights in Africa Award. Violence against women and girls is a global problem, but today, 3 women in South Africa today will have been killed by their partners. Vicky Nsini was a pioneering businesswoman who ran a B&B in a tough township. She wanted to change perceptions about where she lived. Her home was welcoming and joyful, and visitors from all over the world loved it. She was also a truly inspiring and much-loved mother. But she was murdered by her husband with a knife in their bedroom. Some of her children witnessed the frenzied attack, and it is heartbreaking how much they miss her. When we tell them of this award, we will say that it is in recognition of how their mother, Vicky, is still helping people, still encouraging people, still starting conversations. They will no doubt be very, very proud. To all of the team at ITN, to Tom Giles and Michael Jermy at ITV, to dear Lee and Sharon at Shoot the Breeze Productions in Cape Town, and to Paul Martin at Media Zones, thank you for helping us to bring this very important story to an international audience. Thank you.
I just want to tell you that we've been filming Vicky as a continuation, or Vicky's children as a continuation of this story, which we hope will be part of a documentary. And when we played them the tape of this film, this On Assignment film which we made, they were of course in tears, because we were showing them the film in the same house where Vicky was murdered by her husband, and these kids had witnessed this, and they saw our film. They were moved by it, there was tears, but they're also proud that they can do something to reveal the awfulness of these sorts of crimes, and they're all hoping to overcome these problems. But the tragedy is that 2 of the children have said they don't want to marry men anymore, they don't trust them anymore. This is the legacy of this continued terrible crime that continues in South Africa, my home country, and we hope that these sorts of revelations will do something to show this to the world public and to the South African public. Thanks.